Sam, a fox, a board, and a Hellmuth walk into a bar. They know the bartender. They order tons of drinks. They get drunk, beer, wine, gin, you name it. As they leave to go to their car, the bartender says, "No, you guys can't drive right." And they say, "No, we're going to drive on the left."
Ah, very clever. Very clever. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Two Fish at the Table Poker podcast. This time, we're going to be breaking our own personal record for main events covered. Not one, not two, three main events. Europe in 2010, 2011, and 2012. I'm one of your hosts, East Coast Samuel.
I'm one of your hosts, Legend of on Poker Stars. And before we get into that, into this really our WSOP Main Event Europe Spectacular, we have to talk about briefly the aftermath of one of our possibly best interviews we've had with Ernest Wiggins last time. Honestly, that was incredible. We got some great insight, some fun facts, some behind the scenes stuff that we didn't know about, like how about the audacity that they showed his table first when it was chronologically not the first table. Right. I was totally caught off guard by that one.
Yeah, I mean, he was just such an awesome guy. I mean, we're not paying these people who come on the show, everybody. I mean, we tell them at the end, you can plug anything you want, but we're not paying them, or, they're just here out of the kindness of their heart because they want to spread enthusiasm about the game. And just, watch the interview if you haven't seen it. There's so many great moments in it. I mean, I think my favorite moment from the interview was when you, Ben, asked the question about the head roll. That was just so genuine. Like, it really didn't dawn on me when you watch the footage. He comes off so casual and confident that, this is the first time he's ever bet $36,000. And it's such a great moment.
It was fantastic, and he really was on the ball as far as knowing what we were asking him about. It was still fresh in his mind, and it adds a whole extra level of entertainment and excitement for me when we can really engage with our interviewee that strongly.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anybody is interested in coming on the show, we really are interested in hearing from anybody. If you're on a cash game, if you're in a WSOP event, if you were in Europe, if you're in the Asia Pacific, whatever, we'd love to hear from you. And of course, Ernest, thank you so much if you are listening to this. It was great having you. We'd love to have you again if you're interested in a few months or a year or whenever. Feel free to come back on the show if you want.
And this episode probably got people online talking the most out of all of the content we've created thus far. We got some great feedback online. People were really appreciative that we were able to get him, over a decade after the fact to reflect on such great moments in poker history. So that was fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, still kind of in the same time period, the early 2010s, we'll be discussing the three main events from the WSOP Europe circuit line. And start things off, we have the 2010 main event Europe. And this one, it's funny that since we've discussed all the different American main events, we can really kind of compare element A to main event B here, because really this main event is kind of an amalgamation of a lot of the main event content, or the WSOP content that happened in 2011.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a very interesting one because before they covered the entire tournament and really gave time to just let this storyline breathe, we're cutting right to day 4 and down to the final 3 tables, which is an interesting decision.
Yeah, kind of like how on the American broadcast, how they would gradually move up the timing for the first episode in the tournament sort of layout. So we actually began, like I said, on day 4, and the production style actually is comparable to 2011 in America, which kind of dates this as kind of the origin of this style, because this main event would have taken place after the 2010 America, but before the 2011 in America. So this was kind of the first time they used these graphics and this sort of not quite live, but not quite not live style, which we talked about in our first ever live podcast that we did last year. So the camera work, the editing, the style, the sort of layout of the productions is very similar to 2011, although it does take place in the same casino in Europe as 08 and 09, that kind of has that second floor where the secondary table is held. So it's a bit of a hybrid here. The field size is still pretty much in that same ballpark, 346 players this time around. So again, we're not talking about a massive main event, and we're talking about a very similar field to years past.
But even though the field's small and we have a lot of really talented players here. I mean, right off the bat, they're hyping up Phil Ivey being in the final 22. We also have Roland de Wolf in the mix. We have Victor Blum in the mix. We have Danny Steinberg there, who is the brother, twin brother of another Steinberg who makes the final table. Interesting to see both of them making the final table there. Yeah, a lot of, and even the players who aren't super well known, still fairly talented players. So even though we don't have a huge field, we have in terms of quality a pretty good field.
Yeah, and so it's funny. It always feels like whenever there's a drastic shift in the production of the main event, it kind of reignites some sort of fire in me as a viewer, even if the action isn't particularly A++. Just having a change up definitely kind of gets your attention a little bit, at least to start off with. And that's definitely emblematic in this main event in particular. After 09, that was kind of a bit of a letdown after a strong 08. I wouldn't call this significantly better than 09, but at least by mixing up the formula, it did stand out to me. Each of these main events we'll be talking about are 4 episodes long, and each one actually changes up the formula of what each episode will cover. So surprisingly, not unsurprisingly, of these 4 episodes for 2010, 2 of them build up the lead up to the final table, and then 2 of them are for the final table. And again, Phil Ivey on display on table 1, with a couple other tables that don't really get a ton of memorable action. It's really kind of focusing on maybe giving a storyline or 2 as someone at the featured table, over maybe providing a more balanced edit for all 3 tables.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of the interview segments and stuff, we get a couple here and there. They're not super insightful, but we do get, a little bit of a sense of who each player is in the interview. We have this guy Fleischman who says that he's a CEO and how that affects his table image. They obviously cover a lot of Steinberg. He gets a couple interviews throughout. So, there's not as much of a, we mentioned how refreshing that sort of European emphasis was in previous years, that they would do, sort of goofy little things like Norm would ask people like what certain poker terms meant on London. There's not as much of that here, maybe because they feel they've done that in previous years, but I miss that. I wish there was a little bit more of that in the coverage.
Well, there's a little bit of Natalie Pinkham kind of being the host. I mean, Kara Scott was not a part of this production, so they had to have someone kind of be an XP for her there. And so she does interview a few people here and there, either as exit interviews or kind of in side segment bits. But again, this was the kind of the time in the main event's history where they were kind of veering away from the nuts or those sort of comedic, moments away from the poker action, which is unfortunate because for the most part, this poker action, and particularly in episode 1, I think is not particularly memorable. It's not boring, but it just kind of doesn't really mean much. There's no hands. I'd be like, you got to watch this hand. I would say there's one positive here is that we do get to see it because we see 7 bust outs in this episode. There is enough time to show a few players kind of hit a chip decline before they finally bust. So there's a bit more of a narrative to a gradual decline before busting for a player. Like Ivy, for example, he does win a couple hands and he loses a few and then he busts out. So that has some sort of unspoken sort of poker narrative to it.
Yeah, I mean, they really hype up Phil Ivey at the start of the episode, and we see plenty of hands from him. Nothing super special, as you mentioned. Then he sort of busts halfway through the episode, and then that's just kind of it, which I think it's just, I understand Phil Ivey's a big player. You got to hype him up a little bit, but hyping him up that much at the start of the episode only to see him bust halfway through, I think is a bit of a weird decision. I wish they'd given a little bit more.
It's definitely a little bit odd. I mean, we've mentioned how before, oftentimes some of my favorite, end poker tournament content, that day 7, the final 3 tables onward, is often some of the best because you get a chance to see some of those big chip stacks that are in the lead kind of decline, or you see some of the short stacks rise, or you see some, you're getting to see who's going to make this final table, in that as the action's so focused on a small portion of the overall tournament. In this case, by actually beginning kind of in that spot, it's just a little awkward by having that. I mean, it's day 4, so we've missed 3 days of the tournaments. I mean, there usually is at some point a little montage in these sort of main events of a very, very brief, showcase of what happened in those early days. But that's really a banded over a bullet wound as far as showing us the full story of the whole tournament. Yeah,
I mean, the only flash I get in this episode is the Phil Hellmuth entrance, where he walks in with a bunch of Lady Gaga impersonators, which, it's a little funny. It's not as funny as his other entrances, crashing the car, for example, but it gets, it's a little funny. And then he just busts, so not much of an impact there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, going into episode 2 here, we go from 15 players down to 9, so the final table, and it's about as tension and emotion free a bubble as it really gets, and that's partially, I think, a result of the venue, the casino. I mean, by having in Las Vegas, when there's the bubble, there's a huge crowd, the energy is up, the players are tense, you can see their face usually. That's not really the case here. I mean, there's significantly fewer dollars or euros in this case, or pounds, I guess, in this case at stake. So that's probably part of it. If you watch this episode, you'll notice that table 2 is kind of murder's row. We have the majority of the bust outs take place on table 2, and table 1 there's some decently good action, but the bust outs are all coming pretty much exclusively on table 2. We get a bit more of the players that'll make the final table kind of really focused in on, because naturally this is before the final table is about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a unique sort of chip count graphic shown, which showed table 1's chip counts and then the table 2 chip leaders counts. That was kind of interesting. I guess it kind of reminded me of Joe McKeon when he was running table 1 in 2015, where you were comparing, he had the whole table to himself, and then the other table was, in its own world over there. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah, it is always interesting to see a dynamic like that. I mean, how do you change your strategy when, if you're at the table where not much action's happening, do you just wait for the other players to just knock each other out at the other table? And if you're at that table, what do you do? How do you adjust your strategy? It'd be interesting to see that dynamic play out a little bit more and be explained a little bit more. But it's a fairly steady clip of hands. And again, nothing super exciting. There's not too much drama in the air or anything like that. And also the editing's a little weird. I mean, at the start of this episode, they try to hype up, like, we've got all these British players. Maybe a British player will win this year. But Steinberg, who's an American, gets a lot of the tension. He really is sort of the favorite son of this episode. He has a segment about, how this is the toughest field he's ever played in. You have to play very aggressive. That's all cool. I mean, I like Steinberg. It's just, it's that sort of awkward edit again, where you're trying to hype up something that isn't really present in the episode itself. And so there's this weird mishmash. You also have this character, Lee, who really starts to take control of the action more toward the second half of the episode. But he's also a very quiet guy, which is, again, no problem. But again, makes for an odd edit where you have this guy who's going to finish second in chips going into the final table and isn't too far from being first in chips, but just doesn't get that much excitement or edit about him.
Yeah, I mean, I always judge a episode partially on, are there any players I care about? And because, I'm a twin, and because I'm a fan of Max Steinberg, obviously I went for his twin, Danny Steinberg. So it's nice to have him be kind of this spotlight character. I know DeWolf a bit from like the poker like Premier League, like from way back when, which maybe we'll do sometime in the future. But I don't really know him from anywhere else. So and then Hoyt Corkins doesn't last very long in this episode. So he obviously was really the third guy I knew I actually had any sort of connection to as a poker player in this. Again, yeah, it's not the best bubble episode for a final table. Mm-hmm. It just kind of comes and goes. It wasn't boring. It wasn't meme-tastic or viral or anything. It just kind of comes and goes, which is okay every now and then. I mean, this is kind of a unique spot where really with 4 episodes, you kind of want to have each one be memorable.
Right.
On the other hand, the final table, which we'll get to, it's actually pretty good. So I'm willing to overlook past flaws here and there to get to the good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the only really, great moment for me is Mike the Mouth not being able to identify Buckingham Palace. About it.
Yeah, it's pretty good too.
Yeah.
So, we get to the final table, 9 players in this one. Again, broken into 2 parts. The first half gets us from 9 players down to 4. Mm-hmm. And it opens with kind of like a weird, like, spy kind of theme intro. It was kind of bizarre. I guess they're just, everything spirally must be referred to the UK because of James Bond, I guess. So it's maybe a little stereotype at work there, but it was kind of amusing for me.
That was funny, yeah.
And overall, I mean, this episode covers a little over half of the total hands played at this final table, which you can expect when you're busting over half the table in the episode. There's some pretty good mini narratives as far as chip distribution, chip flow, going here, going there, chip leader dropping way down. I thought it worked pretty well, and there was a pretty healthy balance of all the players getting some time in the spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, the ninth and eighth players bust fairly early in the episode to Lee, who really takes control of the action from there and is hyped up as like the guy to beat after that point. Yeah, I mean, it's a fairly decent episode to begin with. Again, nothing like super exciting or bold actions or anything like that. But yeah, there's a good mix of players. You get a sense of how each person's playing, get sort of a little sense of what, each player's table image is supposed to be. Board, sort of more of like the tighter player, so to speak. The guy who's not really mixing it up. Lee is really raising and trying to push the action along. You get a little bit of sense of everybody, which is nice.
Yeah, Lee, he kind of reminded me of Jason Mercier in '09, where he was the chip leader at the start. Maybe loses a couple hands and then wins a hand and kind of stays on that, that chip leader spot. And there's actually a couple of pretty awkward, memorable hands here. There's hand number 2 in the episode shows Steinberg winning the most awkward showdown ever, winning up 8 high on a board that has 4 kings on it. So 8 high beats like 5 high. That's kind of funny when you get counterfeited on the river, and then some bizarre hand wins at the end. And a hand that I actually didn't realize was a part of this tournament was originally a part of an angle shoot compilation hand video on YouTube, where someone gets, in this case, Levi gets tries to angle shoot a call, and then Steinberg kind of like verbalizes how it's kind of an angle shoot, and then it kind of ends up screwing Fleischman because he was bluffing and was hoping for a fold. So a guy being forced to make the call by a tournament director kind of ruins the whole bluff success probability for that hand. So kind of an awkward hand. I actually, when I first saw that hand in that video, years and years ago, I thought it was Max Steinberg. I didn't even know he had a twin that was the one verbalizing his discontent in that hand. So kind of funny.
Did you think it was angle shooting, or did you think it was a mistake?
Well, the thing is that forward motion, we've had that be a controversy in years past with Nikolai Losev and then Michael Dentali, which took place like 2 years after this one. So you have to wonder the timeline of what the rules were when. And technically, the rules in Europe aren't always the same as they are in America. So really, we don't even know technically as a viewer, unless you Google the rule book from that year, what constitutes a call, what constitutes a forward motion, or if that's even a rule in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like comparing it to Losev is a little unfair, because with Losev, he fully extended his arm out, then pulled it back, and then pushed the chips out. With Levi, it was more kind of like this. He kind of sort of like that, which I still think it counts as forward motion. I still think you should put the bet in, but I think it was a genuine mistake. I think he wanted to call and then kind of changed his mind halfway through and took the chips back. I don't think he was trying to angle shoot there.
Well, there's also Filippo Candio, where he did sort of the hook shot with his arm. And so if you compare all of these different forward motion situations, I'm sure you could probably come up with 4 different explanations for what constitutes over the line of what's too far in front of you, or even just it's like in football with the tuck rule, the ball's going forward. Better. So I think that I think he was always going to call anyway, so I don't really think it matters. But it's just too bad that Fleischman gets screwed when he seems like a pretty likable guy, and he was in a pretty good spot when everything was going on in this tournament. And then unfortunately he busts only a few hands after the angle shoot hand takes place.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame for him. Yeah, I mean, at an interesting image, he was the sort of CEO who's kind of mixing it up a little bit. Yeah, it's just a shame. And he busts to Lee of all people. So Lee's just steamrolling at this point. I mean, he's definitely the guy to beat as you're going through this episode.
But I guess almost trying to not be outmatched in the controversial sort of gameplay. The hand after Fleischman busts, Steinberg manages to correctly fold 2 pair against Lee after Lee had made an illegal call. And Steinberg kind of correctly identifies the situation by saying it sucks, but it's such an easy fold, which is a pretty boss move statement to make in that sort of awkward spot, because it's funny. It does seem like these illegal call raise situations are pretty polarized. But for the most part, it's usually a pretty strong hand, we've noticed over the years, looking at all these different situations where it comes up. But nonetheless, you never know what's intentional, what's unintentional, or what's intentionally unintentional. So it's a pretty good psychological warfare by Steinberg to make the right fold there.
Yeah, and then he busts in 6th, which is a shame. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely a smart guy. He did totally apologize to Fleischman after the fact, after that supposed angle shooting. It was an innocent mistake on his part.
And by episode's end, with only 4 players left, Lee had every single KO.
Right.
It's unfortunate, not a bounty tournament, because you'd have quite a few bounties locked up here. But he ends up, in a very strong chip leader position with, just a couple with DeWolf, with Board and Baldessari kind of in his way. And Baldessari, actually, we should mention, he was a familiar face in previous Main Event Europe, so it's kind of cool to have at least somebody else that was a continuity point in the roster for the final table, because up until this point we usually had Negreanu or somebody that we had seen in the previous Europe Main Event in the action there.
Yeah, and he was playing okay. I mean, nothing super stellar, but he was holding his own. Just seemed to be sort of waiting his spot. So it was interesting to see it going into episode 4 exactly what happened, because I didn't know who the winner was. And honestly, based off of the coverage going into episode 4, you're thinking this is Jamie Gold. Lee's just going to steamroll over everybody. It's just interesting to see how that changes.
And just the more I'm talking about this episode, the more I really think it was pretty solid overall. I mean, you had a lot of, again, these awkward angle shoot, maybe not quite hands happening, which we don't really see at final tables ever. Maybe, day 3, day 4, day 5, sure. And we had some solid bluffs. We had some, big all-ins. And so, again, overall, it's a pretty diverse roster of hands on in the edit for us to watch here. And so I think it works really solidly.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then we get to episode 4, the final table, part 2, 4 players left. And again, Lee kind of winning the early hands here. So you really are starting to think, oh, okay, I think it looks like he's going to close this thing out. And then DeWolf busts to Baldessari. DeWolf never really kind of could get any sort of momentum. He was hanging in there, 4th place, considering it was pretty short stacked for a good part of this whole tournament that we saw here. Pretty impressive for him. And ironically, we do see some raise and takes in the edit of all these European main events we're going to be discussing today, which is something that we really didn't ever see except for like 2019 in the American main events. So, and they kind of make it work a bit better than they do in 2019 main event America, because it just kind of fits more in the context of the episode, the table dynamic. I'm not sure how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few, especially right at the start of this episode. We have 2 hands where Board comes into a pot, Lee raises him, and Board folds. It's an interesting way to sort of build Board's character, because as I mentioned before, Board was kind of seen as the guy in the background waiting to find his spots. It's interesting that we just, that's how the episode starts. That's really your first impression of Board, who eventually, spoiler, is going to win the tournament, is with those 2 hands. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see so many limp raise folds or re-raise folds throughout the entire coverage.
But then the middle part of this episode is really just kind of the trials and tribulations of Lee, oftentimes with the best hand or in a flip, just kind of not winning that one hand that can kind of just really kind of close this thing out. So, he accumulated so many chips with some well-timed aggression, and it almost always worked out for him. And then, he Board doubles up to him in a flip, and then Lee makes a great call again, or a great bluff catch against Baldessari, and then Lee gets unlucky with a 3-outer, like ace king against ace 4, and then you really felt like Lee really deserved this in a sense. Poker doesn't really have anyone deserve things, but it really seemed like he should have won this thing, and then he ends up busting in 3rd place of all things because of just some really bad misfortune.
Yeah, I mean, that last hand where Board's got the ace king and Lee's got the 5s. Lee, who, as I mentioned before, wasn't a super emotive or talkative guy. There's a very, very brief segment with him at the start of this episode where he really just says, like, I'm an aggressive player, and if I win, I'll be happy. And that's really the whole segment. But during that last hand, like, you can tell on his face, he's dejected. He is really sad. Meanwhile, Board and Baldessari are just celebrating. Something I haven't mentioned up to this point is Board is the hometown hero. He's got like 2/3 of the stand is all his friends, and they're cheering for him at every pot. So when Board wins the stand, they're all cheering. He's jumping in the crowd, and Lee's just kind of walking around all sad by himself. It's sad. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for Lee, but again, 3rd place is still something to be proud of. Great effort, and he really played great, which leads us to the heads up portion of the episode. About the last 18 minutes, a little under half of the episode. In real time, this was 37 hands, an hour and a half of poker play. The chip count 6.2 million against 4.1 million. So it's a 3-2 chip advantage. Nothing totally insurmountable. I mean, it's
Yeah,
definitely, close enough.
absolutely.
Lines were like 30K, 60K, so still very workable. And the heads up play was okay. I would call it kind of average. I mean, it wasn't one sided. It wasn't super aggro Tony Miles against John Sin level or
Mhm.
anything. But it does its job okay.
Yeah, I mean, the only real hand that I found sort of interesting out of this, again, nothing super bad, but the only real hand was when Board goes all in with Ace King, Baldessari calls him with Queen Eight, and like Baldessari's sitting at the table making these like he's talking in Italian, but it just sounds so weird because his face is buried in his hands, and it's a terrible call too. I mean, Queen Eight suited, all right, it's okay, but we've got that many chips. Why not wait for a better spot?
It's the kind of hand where I can see someone actually shoving all in pre-flop heads up, but not calling off with. As
Yeah.
you're pretty much just hoping for like fives again. Like that's literally the only hand really that I feel like you can that where you were putting their opponent on fives to really even call it. And then even then, why would you? I mean, it was a fairly even fight. Baldessari arguably maybe even with the slight edge, at least from the edit that we saw up until that point in the heads up match. So I wonder if he saw something in board that just told him he was full of it, or if he just wanted to Queen Eight. As long as it doesn't have nines or higher, then I'm pretty much gonna win most of the time. It's just kind of silly. And then just a couple, 14 hands later in real time, he ends up busting with fives against tens. It is crazy how it heads up play, how often someone will shove fives and just like be like, please don't have anything better, please. Like, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't shove fives like that personally.
Yeah, I mean, the action is Baldessari with fives makes it 200. Board makes it 855. Then Baldessari re-raises to 2.2 million. Board insta shoves, which I think is indicative of strength. And Baldessari calls. Yeah, I mean, you think you got to fold the fives? Yeah, come on, wait for a better spot.
So again, while the heads up play may be a little bit questionable by Baldessari, I still think overall is a very solid part to the final table.
Yeah.
And overall, a very effective final table. Again, using the format of the modern day main event editing and just having such a great sort of subtle, not like in your face crazy action like in 2010 in America with all the crazy all-ins and the grinder and versus Jarvis up and down all-ins, but just solid sort of flow of player begins here and they go up and then down and then they go out. I think that element is very solid overall.
Yeah, I think that element is solid. I mean, the issue is, as I've mentioned in years past, I like narrativization. I like seeing characters be established in numerous episodes throughout, and you see them change as players and grow as players as time goes on. But because we start right at day 4, we only have 4 episodes overall, we don't really have that narrativization. We don't know Board as much as we know Barry Schulman from the previous year, for example. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that narrative. I mean, a little bit of a flavor for Board, a little bit of a flavor for Baldessari, but I prefer it better when there's more time to really let these character arcs develop.
I mean, there's only 3 parts of the puzzle I want. You want characters, you want good poker, and you want entertainment.
Yeah.
And I think the poker, particularly in the final table, is very solid. The other 2 elements less so, although it does kind of set the stage for why I think in 2011 is some of the best played poker, but not flashy poker. We'll see possibly in any main event we've covered up until this point. But again, the entertainment. I mean, I wasn't bored like 2018 or 2019 in the American main events, but it just wasn't particularly strong in that one category.
Yeah, I mean, I still enjoyed these episodes. I mean, I've seen the angle shooting clip before. I would see it again. I would watch the final episode, The Fall of Lee. Definitely is up there with other chip leaders who have blown up at the final table. And I mean, no offense to Lee, kind of just didn't go his way. I mean, he should have really won this. But yeah, I mean, it was fun to watch that. I just think it could have been a little bit better with the character building, and I like to see that.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair assessment. And it does lead us into the very similarly produced 2011 main event Europe. This time, a change in venue played in France, which has a couple of changes that we'll discuss. And actually, I guess maybe because of the location, a moderate increase in the field size. They actually jumped up to 593 players. Obviously, new venue means new chips. including the infamous, in my eyes at least, the plaques, the 100K chip plaques, which will be used in 2012 as well. Otherwise, the production, graphics, and all that's very, very continuous of the year prior, as well as 2011 in America and so on. Day 4 begins with 25 players, but episode 1 doesn't begin until about halfway into day 4 with only 16 players left.
Yeah, I mean, again, I prefer narrativization. I prefer to really see characters build out. Again, we get lucky that we have quite a few players that we know. We have Patrick Antonius, who's sort of the Phil Ivey of this year, hyped up as the big player, except, he's never won a bracelet, so there's a little bit more intrigue there. We also have Mormon in the mix, and Amir Lehavod is also in the mix, who wasn't a huge player at the time, but, would later become a slightly bigger name. Yeah, and, it's decent to start. I mean, there's some interesting little editing choices. Like they do an early tournament segment, and they have this like weird shot of the bracelet where they add like this sound effect and lens flare to try to make it look cool. And I think it just looks cheesy. Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a little weird here and there.
Well, other players we do know, Max Silver, who made a couple of consecutive deep main event runs in 2016, 2017. He was actually the young gun on the field with only 21 years of age. He was the chip leader when this coverage begins. And then also our boy Brian Roberts from 2 months, 2 million, which will get no less than probably 10 references over the course of this entire main event, which I didn't see coming at all. I knew it gets name dropped once in this episode. I thought that was going to be it, but they will keep coming back to it. With only 16 players left, there's only 2 tables left, 8-handed both ways, and unfortunately, the action very much skews heavily towards table 1. I think partially to focus on Mormon and Antonius, who are both at table 1. But I mean, the style, it feels very similar to obviously the last one in 2010, but it was definitely a bit more forgettable in that there was just too many re-raise and takes, which has its place in poker action and poker tournaments, and I will admit that the actual like timing of a lot of these re-raises and takes is definitely strong from a poker gameplay standpoint, but from an entertainment standpoint, it's not quite up there with what are better hands to show in an edit. And with only 16 players left, covering we're covering basically 8 bust outs in 2 episodes to lead into the final table. We only have 1 bust out in this episode, and it occurs at the very end of the episode, which means that this episode joins the list of fewest bust outs in an episode of all time, not cutting a heads up for the final 2, with Michael Novinsky's busted episode 2019. So that was kind of an amusing side bit there. But again, overall, just I didn't write a single highlight for table 1, ironically. All of the highlights for me came really on table 2, and we didn't see any of that table for the first half of the episode. So that was definitely out of balance.
Yeah, I mean, they have several interview segments in this. They're really trying to spend time sort of building the characters of Antonius, also Jake Cody, winning a bracelet, being sort of hyped up as he was on a big heater at the time. So he was sort of the golden boy. Also, this guy Buchanan, who's the sort of soft-spoken Canadian player who doesn't have a super flashy game or anything, but, just comes off as a nice guy. Also, Matern gets a segment for previous World Series of Poker Europe runs. We talked about how Baldessari won a bunch of runs, but this guy Matern also won a number of runs. So it's kind of interesting to see so much character development packed into this one episode.
Yeah, and so overall, it's definitely a kind of a weak sauce episode to start off the main event. Basically, the main takeaway is Max Silver drops a bit and Jake Cody rises, but with only 1 player that we don't know on table 2 busting, it really doesn't. And the hand isn't even shown properly. Like it's not even shown like until midway through the hand. So when it's your only bust of the entire episode, you should really be showing it a bit more effectively than that.
Quite right. Yeah, I agree with you.
Episode 2 kind of has some similar problems in that the quality of poker play, again, pretty strong. I mean, there's a pretty high level poker hand between Max Silver and Jake Cody with Queen 10 and Ace Queen, for example, that, it's not often I find poker to be like educational as far as like, just the quality of play being, at a level where you're really kind of drawn in by what each player is doing to the other one. Like that doesn't happen very often for me. And that definitely hit that itch for me there, but entertainment wise, definitely not great.
Yeah, something that we didn't mention about the raises is this quirk in French poker rules, which I didn't know about, where you have to make raises that are twice the size of the previous bet. You're not matching the raise size. You're matching. So if I bet 1 million, and or if Ben wants to raise me, he has to do 2 million. But if I want to raise Ben, I have to make it 4 million, which really changes things. I mean, it's a very interesting quirk in the rules.
Yeah, and for the most part, I don't think it affects the poker play too much because we don't
Yeah.
really see much in the way of min raising. For the most part, it's usually like maybe 2.3 or 2.4x the last raise size, so it doesn't really change things too much. But it's a rule that'll be mentioned once or twice each main event. That's in France. That includes 2011 and 2012 afterwards. Um, with table two kind of is the murderous table again. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Just the main TV table kind of has that stigma of you don't want to act too stupid on television. So
Yeah.
I'll play maybe a bit more conservatively, or maybe that's just a coincidence entirely. But we have in the 7 bust outs of this episode, 5 of them are on table 2.
Yeah.
And those all come kind of in the middle of the 7 bust outs because the last one takes place on table 1. And so Elio Fox actually gets a double KO at one point with pocket tens against ace king and aces.
Yeah.
And that kind of takes place during a very kind of climactic ending of the pre-final table action because we had 3 bust outs within one hand of each other with that KO on table 2 and then Antonius busts on the hand happening kind of after / concurrently on table 1 after he had been crippled in a big hand against Mormon where he just gets screwed by the deck. Big surprise there.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty solid, action-packed ending there, which means there's really no final table bubble per se, which is, I guess, both a curse and a blessing because those bubbles aren't always memorable, but sometimes it's kind of nice to have that sort of, stretch of time in the episode where there's a bubble before any final table. And the only other hand really I can speak to is Leha Vogt losing a big flip and then busting after another 3-way all in. So the actual hands that lead to a bust out are for the most part pretty good, but all the action surrounding it is pretty forgettable.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I mean, they do a decent job spreading the bust outs out. There's usually until the end, a few minutes, couple hands between each one. But yeah, I mean, we have a couple segments here or there. We're sort of building off of the characters previously. We have another segment with Buchanan. We have another segment with Antonius. But yeah, nothing, it's nice to have a little bit more character development than we had the previous year in 2010, but still nothing super interesting or dynamic. I mean, they're all nice guys, but there's nothing super special about them.
It does lead to, because of the pace of bust outs towards the end, it leads to the short stack of the final table still being relatively healthy considering some of the pretty short stacks we've seen in these sort of final tables. The short stack still has 1 million chips, which is over 30 big blinds. So definitely means that ICM or short stack trying to survive definitely is a bit less daunting from the final table onward. And we should also mention that the final table here is a final 8.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of different changes in French poker compared to UK poker or American poker at work here.
Yeah, I don't know why they have those rules, the French, but it's nice. Adds a little flavor.
Yes. And so by the time the final table comes around for episode 3, we have 8 players. They play down to 6.
Yeah.
Note the number 6 there. They play on to 6 players. And they actually introduce those 100K plaques we mentioned earlier, which are kind of cool. I mean, I don't know. I like having lots of chips in front of me, but the plaques are kind of awkward because they're card shaped.
Yeah.
Which I guess is kind of cool. But having like a stack of plaques like that just doesn't look as cool as having a big stack of chips, if you ask me.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the plaques are ugly. I don't like them. I mean, they're so big. And then like my favorite part is when they have a bunch of like a stack of plaques and then they put chips on top and like push it forward and they're like hands all contorted as they're pushing it forward. I prefer chips. I think chips are cooler.
Yeah, I'm here there. And so this episode has not only a mentioning of the European or French poker raise rule, but even more mentions of 2 months, 2 million, where they kind of make fun of the show for being canceled after 1 season, which we discussed before that, it could have had a solid 2nd season. I mean, they won, a little, like what, a third of their goal. And so it's still something. And again, the focus was more about just having fun than having, winning 2 million, it felt like. So to see them being kind of pretty cruel, like, pretty like TV versus TV. Like usually only South Park or Family Guy are that kind of cruelty to a different TV show. So
Yeah. And Roberts had one of the more interesting interview segments out of all of these, where he says, like, I want to win this, but it's more about getting my career out there than like winning a tournament or winning a bunch of money, which I think is, I'm not saying that like he's like obsessed with being famous or anything, but it's interesting to just hear him talk so bluntly about that.
Yeah, I mean, he was, a unique kind of like all talk, no bite character in 2 Months, 2 Million. So he's kind of, I mean, he does put up good results here. I mean, he makes to the final table. He survives the first half of the final table. But I don't know. It's interesting that the value of a win. I mean, in Hellmuth and Negreanu, we'll probably discuss sometimes too, is that there's so much value in winning a bracelet more than just winning the bracelet, because it elevates your profile in the poker world when it's your first bracelet, particularly because especially back then in 2011, where there weren't nearly as many events per year as there are now, and so the value of a bracelet is substantially bigger back then than it is now.
Yeah.
But getting into this episode, I guess you can tell that we're trying to avoid talking about this episode because it's a pretty forgettable episode. I mean, the energy is kind of low, the pace is kind of a bit slow. I mean, there's some okay poker action, I guess, but I don't think this is nearly as strong a final table as 2010 was, for example.
Yeah, remember how I've been talking earlier in the episode about, edit hype versus reality? Mormon's hyped up as like, he's the crazy player. Like he'll take any 2 cards and he'll do whatever and he'll mix it up in every hand. But he doesn't win a lot of the time he does that. I mean, King 9, 10, 3 of spades, okay, you're mixing it up a little bit, but you have to mix it up and be effective about it. And he doesn't really do that.
I mean, he does go Bill Brunson on Blaine once, making also 10-2, and then he makes a successful 4-bet with Queen 4 at one point. So we do see some of that kind of crazy any 2 cards, kind of the opposite of any 2 card poker that we see from Hellmuth in 2012, where he's actually going for it with these weird cards versus just playing the hands in the first place with them.
Yeah.
And so the action, it's just kind of, again, of the 3 final tables we'll be discussing in this episode, it's I think by far the least successful. And this episode is probably the worst of all the episodes that we've covered for the final table half of the affairs.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the problems is Fox, he has the chip lead, and sure, some people give him a little bit of trouble, but he's at 7 million chips by the end. I mean, he's really doing a very good job keeping his stack and pushing through, which, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I'm not trying to criticize Fox. It doesn't make for very interesting television.
Well, he was kind of riding the chip wave after having the double bust out at the end of the two-table play. He was at 3.8 million after that. And he gets extremely lucky on the last hand of the episode against Jake Cody, winning of 10s against Cody's jacks in a 6 million chip pot, turning it straight. So, if he had lost that hand, it changes the whole story. And really, again, kind of like with Lee busting out in 2010, getting unlucky. I mean, the champion has to get lucky at some point. I'm not saying that doesn't happen to everybody, but it's just kind of irks me when Jake Cody was grinding his way up from poverty to chip monarchy, and can't quite do at the end.
Yeah, and again, so much hype for him in the earlier episodes, and to see him go out in 7th, it's just, again, a little awkward that he got so much hype and he really wasn't that close to winning the tournament.
And so with Jake Cody busting, we're left with 6 players at the end of this episode. So episode 4 has our final 4 playing down to a winner. Wait a minute. 6 and 4. What is that? I don't understand. Explain this to me, Sam.
It's the weirdest, and I was so confused when I saw this. I'm like, wait, what? Huh? Like it's the weirdest editing decision I've ever seen. Like, why would you do that?
I mean, on Poker Go, you can see a brief sort of description of each episode in the window that it's playing in. And when it said 4 plus, like, that's got to be a typo, right? I've seen they've had mistakes before, but no, they actually skip 2 full bust outs at the start of this episode. So they skip ahead 64 hands from the ending of the previous episode to get to 4-handed play. And then they show us a quick little montage of 6th and 5th place busting out. And I couldn't believe what I was watching. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, and it was Buchanan and it was Blaine. Buchanan, who had gotten multiple interview segments and a lot of talk from the narrators. Blaine had gotten one segment, not as much talk, but Buchanan at the end of the previous episode was fourth in chips with 1.82 million. Blaine was the short stack, but he had still over more than 1 million chips. They both still could have maneuvered their stacks. It's a very strange decision to just cut them out like that.
And if you note the chip counts at the end of episode 3 and the start of episode 4, Roberts was kind of the beneficiary of a lot of those chips, which makes his busting out in 4th place less impactful, because a lot of the chips that he won, that he lost before he busted, we didn't see him accumulating. So it was kind of empty calories in sorts in the edit.
It's very strange. Yeah, I mean, if you want to cram everything into one episode, I guess you got to cut out 2, but why do you want to cram everything into one episode? Why not have a 5-episode season? I don't know. I don't get it. It's very strange.
Now, the start of this episode, the first 4 hands were all played within, or all within a 5-hand stretch. So there was a bit more of a effort to showing kind of consecutive or almost consecutive hands to get a sense of the action in that one moment. That's fine.
Yeah.
But then again, the downfall of Brian Roberts only takes place when he gets a king high flush versus an ace high flush and just gets completely screwed. Roberts, he plays pretty solid, as much as we like to bash him at times for his attitude. He plays pretty solid poker in this entire edit, and then he ends up busting in 4th place to Mormon on the river. Big shocker. Yeah. He's almost kind of resigned to his fate at that point, given how unlucky he had been up until that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's always rough to see ace high flush versus queen high flush, or king high flush, excuse me, especially when Mormon had been, again, the crazy player who could play any 2 cards. I mean, if it was Fox versus Roberts, maybe Roberts can get away there, but it was painful to watch.
Not to mention, I missed even more 2 months, 2 million references by Lon and Norm. Like, they're really harping on it as if this is like the only thing that they have to joke about the entire time. And again, as someone who, we kind of have a unique relationship with that TV show, having reviewed it once, it was just kind of bizarre. And Roberts, that's kind of his claim to fame after 2 months, 2 million, until his, day 7 run in 2014 in the main event. And he's kind of vanished from the poker scene ever since, as far as I know. But at least, he was riding the wave of being out there in the headlines for a little bit there.
Yeah, I mean, I thought 2 months, 2 million was fine. I mean, again, Ben and I both grew up during the golden age of reality TV. So, we watched the show, we watched a bunch of other poker shows and reality television shows, and it reminds me of that era a lot. It was kind of like a guilty pleasure. It's very strange to hear. And I think even at one point, Norm made some joke like, I've never even seen 2 months, 2 million. I've only seen 1 episode. So to hear him just make fun of it, I just think is unfair.
Yeah. And then the very next hand in the episode after Roberts busts, Kranich 3-bet shoves 5-4 into Fox's 9s and goes busto. Well, that's how you go out in 3rd place in easy fashion there. And which at that point gives us half of the episode to show us that the most one-sided heads-up play possibly in main event history, more than Gordon Vail against Greenwood. At least Vail won a few mini pots, here and there along the way. This edit, it's like, I think it's about 10 hands to conclude the episode. Mormon wins the very first one with a 4-bet with Jack 4, and then Fox wins every single hand after that. It's just a gradual grinding and crushing Mormon one step at a time until Mormon ends up so flustered he shoves ace 7 into Fox's ace 10 and loses.
Yeah, and Fox hadn't been super talkative or super emotional either. They even made a joke at one point. Fox, asked Mormon, "Are those stacks of 40?" And Lon and I'm like, "Oh, is this the first time Fox has spoken?" So yeah, I mean, it's not a super exciting heads-up match. Mormon seems clearly frustrated, but he's not like super emotional. He just kind of has a blank expression on his face. There's not much to talk about.
I mean, it's funny because it's kind of fun to watch someone just get crushed over and over again in kind of a NARM sort of way. So I can kind of appreciate it to a certain degree. Once it becomes clear that Fox is just closing this thing out, it kind of becomes a joke at this point. 6 hands in a row, 7 hands in a row, 8 hands in a row. The overall heads-up match was 34 hands long, so we actually saw about 1/3 of the hands that were played in about an hour and 20 minutes of real time. So that's kind of nice. And even with Jay Farber and Ryan Reese, where Reese kind of runs the show, Farber at least wins a couple of hands in there to kind of not make it seem so hopeless.
Yeah.
In this case, it's just no hope for Mormon whatsoever.
Yeah, it's a shame.
So, it's funny with this episode, if you judge it just by what was in the episode, I kind of like it. But in the grand context, it's one of the most frustrating episodes of all time.
Yeah, I'm with you.
It's kind of flawed decency. So it's just the weirdest thing. And so it kind of concludes in one of the more frustrating final tables I think we've ever watched, in that a lot of it was pretty dull, a lot of it wanted me to pull my hair out, and a lot of it was kind of entertaining in the wrong ways.
Yeah, it's a very odd editing decision to have the winner. You don't really hype him up that much. You don't really give him a lot of screen time. You give a lot more screen time to the guy that gets second place. Then you don't show two people's bust outs. It's a bunch of just very odd editing decisions and narrative decisions. Yeah, it's a memorable final table for how confusing it is.
Absolutely. And it leads us into kind of the main event Europe France part 2 with the 2012 main event Europe, with only 420 players this time playing in Cannes. But this is a completely unique child in the family of main event broadcasts. We have no Norman Chet in the booth this time. We have Antonio Esfandiari with Lon McCarran in the booth. And this version of this main event's final table is an abridged version of the live feed of the overall final table, which at first you might be thinking, oh, a bridge version of live feed that sounds like 2019, but it's actually a far superior attempt at showing a final table and showing main event action compared to our hatred of 2019's main event episode breakdown.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, we don't get the whole cards until after the hand is done. So it kind of makes, I really like Antonio sort of parsing at the hands. You sort of play along with them, wondering, oh, what does this player have? What is Hellmuth doing here? And then, Antonio, because just the luck of having Phil Hellmuth be at the final table and having Antonio and Hellmuth's report just makes for so many really funny moments and comments. It's a very interesting experiment. I mean, going into it, I was kind of confused. I'm like, why are they doing this editing decision? But I kind of liked it. I mean, it was an interesting.
I liked it, and there's a couple other important things to remember. Is that one, again, the French raising rule is still in effect. Number two, the player of the year race is a major factor in both the commentary and I guess the gameplay ending results. Esfandiari, of course, having won the one drop that year, is atop the player of the year board. So he's kind of has an emotional investment in the action as well, which adds a whole other layer. And this is all knowing that the main event in America has not concluded yet, with the final table still to be played, of Greg Merson still being in the running, and Hellmuth, of course, being in there. He's and even Joseph Chung being involved there too. So there's a lot of different levels of who could win Player of the Year at stake at this point. So that's also very cool. And on top of it all off, we have a pretty solid roster of players at our final table. Phil Hellmuth, of course, Joseph Chung, who was kind of riding the 3-year wave of big main event success, and even Jason Mercier being at the final table after final tabling in 2009 as well.
Yeah, Mercier briefly, but
well, still
there. Yeah, and then I mean, even the players who we don't know very well, this guy Baranov is given a lot of sort of talk and hype, and we see quite a lot of interesting plays from him, and also a little bit about his personality, that he's sort of this little bit of a poker fanboy. Him and Hellmuth have a really interesting dynamic, and because they're both start off almost identical in chips and are also substantially in the lead. So for example, Hellmuth has 3.43 million, Baranov has 3.34, but Chung is less than 2 million. So they're both like ahead of the pack by quite a bit. And they go back and forth, and they're sitting next to each other. So it makes for a really interesting table dynamic.
It does, and on a small note, the booth will have an occasional guest actually join, as they had Tabatabai and Jesse Sylvia pop in. It's a bit more apparent in the actual live coverage, which unfortunately we don't have the full version of. So we only have the 4-episode abridged breakdown, but it's broadcasted with occasionally showing the hand count of the table's action in the corner. But for the most part, I mean, if you didn't know better, it almost feels like they're just kind of showing things, back to back to back continuous. I mean, there's a few hands that maybe the commentary will reference to that we didn't watch in the edit. But for the most part, it does feel like you just were watching a 4-hour-long final table, and this is what happened, even though that isn't the case.
Yeah, it does have a live feel. There does seem to be this real feel of drama Like you are really watching this live and you're really curious to see who's going to win the tournament, who's going to win player of the year and all that. Like they do a good job with that.
Yeah, and the main event Europe like song that plays in the intro actually is absent from the intro and just gets used in one of the ads in the middle of the episode, which was kind of odd because even though this was a different take on how to show this final table, you thought there'd be a little continuity there, but it's okay, I suppose. And one graphic change that I loved was they would actually show the chip counts in the corner live, like during the hand. So after a bet's made, you see the chip count change a little bit. And so rather than just cutting to the chip count separately after a hand is over, we see it in the middle of the hand. That's also very effective.
Though we should bring up that they often get the graphics wrong, and sometimes the graphics don't even show up on the screen at all, which is kind of odd. Like in the middle of a hand, they'll just drop off the screen, and you'll still hear the bet sizes from the dealer, or the announcers will announce it, though the announcers occasionally get it wrong. So it can be a little bit hard to follow.
No, there's a few hiccups here and there, but overall, it's somehow they found another unique way to broadcast the main event and have it feel different than all the other ways. And so, and then by having 4 episodes to cover a 8-handed play, we get enough time to really settle into the table, get a chance to see everyone's play style sort of based on their chip count or just their attitude to the table. And so we all around it really works for me. So rather than discuss general, let's just get into the first episode, I guess, here.
Absolutely.
Episode 1, 8 players playing down to 5 players. Well, again, Hellmuth and Baranov way ahead in the lead. Hellmuth starts off in a pretty good mood. He's smiling. He's got his hat and glasses on. And Hellmuth just playing any 2 cards imaginable. Like he probably calls out of the small blind to a 2-bet pre-flop more than any player has in the history of final table poker.
It's crazy. I mean, he's playing 9-7. He's playing, he's still getting cards here and there. But yeah, it's just insane. I mean, every hand, it's Hellmuth and Baranov, or just, one of those two. It's so much coverage and so many different styles.
And while Hellmuth, Mercier does best relatively early on. He only lasts 2 hands in the edit out in 8th place. He was one of the short stacks, so kind of hard in your handcuff like that. Hellmuth gets put in back-to-back tilt rants after being rivered on by a 2-outer against Chung and a 3-outer against Baranov. And we get some great, what the 3-outer, 2-outer. And he still has a huge chip stat. Like he really never dropped into a danger zone at any point in this final table. So just winning, losing a couple pots on the river like that, he gets so angry, and it just kind of feeds into my, I'm a Hellmuth hand tried and true, but just seeing him that angry over these many pots is just so funny.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for great Hellmuth moments, I mean, these 4 episodes are just like, you could just watch them over and over again and you'd be happy. I mean, it's so much fun to see him mixing up with these hands and then freaking out for really no reason. I mean, as you mentioned, he was playing really good poker. He had a great chip lead. The momentum was with him, and he's still freaking out. It's him. You can tell, like, it's not him BSing or playing up to the cameras. That is actually the way he is.
It's just kind of a live, unfiltered lens into an angry Phil Hellmuth that, having a fresh coat of paint with this kind of main event coverage is really cool. And luckily, the players that we care the least about kind of bust out in 6th and 7th with Geralt and Tedeschi going out, luckily keeping, Baranov, Hellmuth, and Chung at the table a little bit longer. And even Albertini, who we saw make a deep run in 2011 main event in America, I think 43rd, something like that, final 5 tables or something. So he was also, had the poker chops going at that time too. So, the best players kind of lasting. And again, this episode's kind of style over substance. So the action isn't super memorable, except for, the Hellmuth rants, which really kind of take place after the hand. So yeah, but it's just a fresh coat of paint really kind of makes this main event stand out in a good way.
Absolutely.
Episode 2, a little bit slower because we only have 1 bust out. So again, we have a tie for the fewest bust outs in an episode of all time with the ones we've already listed before. Tawa Tabai does join the booth. He was, the final tableist in 07 against Annette Oberstad, 5 years prior to this main event. So he's, has some, European main event experience to draw upon, although doesn't really talk a ton when he's in the booth for the episode.
Yeah, he kind of just comes into the booth sort of randomly in the middle of the episode. I don't mind him. He seems like a nice guy. He got second place against Annette Oberstein. He's clearly got some talent, but it's kind of weird that they just sort of throw him in unspectacularly and just roll with it.
Yeah, I mean, this episode's a very unflashy poker action, but it's just really interesting to watch. It's just seeing this Hellmuth playing any two cards and just sticking to the style, just pounding the table over and over again. He makes an amazing call with 10 deuce, fifth pair to call off a Baranov bluff. Baranov was willing to bluff Hellmuth, even though he could see that Hellmuth was just not folding to him like ever.
Yeah.
Even when Hellmuth had made got unlucky in episode 1 against him once, he just does not let up on the gas against Baranov. And luckily, those two just kind of always have chips to kind of be playing against with each other, so that never really slows down at any point.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such an interesting dynamic when you have two players sitting next to each other with a bunch of tips going at each other. And Chung, who's no slouch, I mean, he's definitely somebody who, with a bunch of chips can be dangerous, just sort of waiting on the sidelines. And then Albertini just keeps getting lucky and just keeps hanging around. So it's such an odd table dynamic between these guys.
No, so again, I think Hellmuth fans really have a lot to enjoy here. Even when Hellmuth loses, it's entertaining. And then, episode 3, as we get down to the nitty gritty here, of 4 players playing on the 3, so we're going to tie for the fewest bust outs in an episode of all time. The Hellmuth Baranov show kicks into overdrive. And to my surprise, actually, there was one hand that did not make the edit that was in a compilation years ago on YouTube of all the Hellmuth tilting and angry ranting on this table. But the hands that we do see, we got to see some great Hellmuth taking some big shots to his chips there against Baranov, where he gets literally floored by Baranov's winning a hand on the river, where he gets check raised on the flop. Hellmuth has the best hand and makes the call, and then when Baranov makes a big bet, Hellmuth snap calls him, and then on the river loses. And Hellmuth says, "The one guy you can't bluff, you're going to check raise." So.
Yeah, he starts getting angry at the dealer for Baranov's success, which is just, it's so amazing. There's no other word to describe it.
And then there was another hand that, again, didn't make the edit, where Hellmuth loses on the river after he had the best hand until the river, and he goes, he literally shouts at his show, "What the?" So good. So good.
It's so good. Oh my God.
And then I guess since I was skipping at it, the third part, though, of this run of bad luck, Hellmuth gets a straight on the river that gives Baranov a flush. And so Hellmuth makes a snap call when Baranov has 5 plaques, tosses them in. Hellmuth goes, literally after the plaques hit the table, Hellmuth goes, call. Straight to the flush. I had a straight. How much this time? He just resigned himself to a failure there.
It's just so funny. Oh, it's so good.
So he loses about like 40% of his chip lead stack in those blows there, but then is able to get a lot of them back with a couple of wins later on with again some questionable cards, 7-3 and King 7 against Baranov. But again, just playing only 2 cards does work because you're going to flop some big hands of garbage sometimes and win.
Yeah, and then Chung busts in 4th. Unfortunately, just wasn't able to get much going. And then Albertini just kind of hangs around in the background. I mean, doesn't really do much, but does, for the most part, stay out of harm's way. Just can't really get much going against these 2 steamrollers just moving through the crowd.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Hellmuth show. There's a pretty lengthy decision by Hellmuth when Baranov makes this big river bluff of 8-6, and Hellmuth has 2 jacks on a 9-2-2 Queen 10 board. That really was kind of the turning point after all the roller coaster ride Hellmuth was having up till that point. He wins a 4.2 million chip pot and really kind of asserts himself in the chip litter spot, which he at that point onward will not let go of, and really kind of ride the wave. He ends up bullying Albertini quite a bit. Yeah, Albertini was kind of in this pattern of he'll win a hand against Baranov and then lose it to Hellmuth right afterwards. So could never really maintain any sort of momentum going forward in the dynamic of the table. Hellmuth again up and then down. It's funny how focused of it's almost like a heads up match between Hellmuth and Baranov of 4-handed play. It's as wild as you'll ever see. It kind of reminded me of Jamie Gold against Alan Cunningham in 2006, where it was really kind of them versus each other for that whole episode until Jamie Gold finally ends it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you bring that up. I mean, they're even talking about it in the coverage, like this is destiny. They're going to go heads up with each other. It's such an unusual dynamic. And at the start of episode 4, I mean, Hellmuth is just a million above Baranov. I mean, if Baranov knocks out Albertini, who's at nearly 2 million, I mean, Albertini's still in there, but if Baranov can knock out Albertini, it's such a different ballgame. Baranov's going to have the lead over Hellmuth, and who knows what could happen.
Well, you mentioned Albertini having 2 million chips, and that's probably one of the biggest gripe I have with this whole final table is at the end of episode 3, Albertini wins a big hand and hits over 3 million.
Yeah.
Episode 4 comes around, he's lost 1 million, which is, pretty substantial. And they keep mentioning how he's lost some chips after he was up, and we don't get to see that original loss of 1 million chips, which is a big deal because it's brought up so many times in the commentary how he was finally getting traction and then kind of lost that traction. So obviously Hellmuth just kind of takes him apart. He knocks him out and kind of forcing him out with the best cards each time though, until Albertini wakes up with a couple of jacks.
Yeah.
Hellmuth ends up calling his all in with 2 7s and just the most brutal of brutal 2 hours on the river to bust in 3rd place when you thought just maybe he can finally get some traction.
Yeah.
And Hellmuth he runs pretty solid, even though he takes those lumps, as Farnhart points out numerous times. It's just Phil's role and all living hands.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, there's this hand before Albertini busts where it's, Albertini versus Hellmuth. Hellmuth shoves on him, and then he stands up and starts chewing on food, and they try to spit it like it's this intimidation tactic, but it's very strange. Albertini manages to get away from it. But it's just it's Hellmuth's show, and Baranov and Albertini are just on stage being the magician's assistants almost. It's crazy.
Just Sylvia does pop into both in this episode. Again, not really all that big a deal. It's just kind of an amusing fact to note. When heads-up play does begin, Hellmuth has more than 3 times the chip stack of Baranov. So that just tells you how well Hellmuth was running from even just, you mentioned that there was only a 1 million chip gap between them when episode 4 began, and Albertini only had about 1 million chips when he busted the Hellmuth. So a lot of that came at the expense of Baranov prior to Albertini busting. And the last 18 minutes are dedicated to heads-up play, although really it's 13 minutes because of the ending.
Right.
And again, it's not quite as one-sided play as 2011 was of Elio Fox and Chris Moorman, but again, Hellmuth just kind of rules the world there. It was only an 18-minute heads-up match in real time.
Really? Wow.
So it's actually kind of funny. It was almost like a 1-to-1 ratio of heads up with the episode and the real time there. Hellmuth makes a pretty crazy but successful 4-high bluff on a double paired board when Baranov has king high, which is an interesting fold there, I guess. And then Baranov actually folds straight to a flush on the river, which it was a 4-card flush on the board to be fair, but nonetheless, still not the easiest fold, if you ask me. And then Baranov gets so frustrated, he ends up shoving ace-4, and then it's just so dejected when he sees Hellmuth turn over ace-10 when his limp re-raise all-in strategy fails miserably. And I guess to commemorate the heads-up, to commemorate the achievement of number 13 for Hellmuth, we get kind of like a 4-minute part of the episode for the ceremony of the bracelet afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, they spend a lot of time showing Hellmuth celebrating, going to people on the rail who I've never seen before, since these random people. He points to this guy and he's like, call the room service, and gives him a hug. And I'm looking at this guy, I'm like, do I recognize him from somewhere? No, I don't. It's very strange. And then we see Jack Effel give the bracelet, but then the casino director, the French casino director, also gives a speech, and another guy gives a speech. It's very strange.
Yeah, and it's fine. I mean, I guess they wanted to have a little bit of time to commemorate the occasion. It is Hellmuth. It is the top bracelet winner of all time, and I think he just continues to add to that total as the years go on. And so I didn't mind. It was something different, I guess. I mean, it felt almost unfair to Fox and Board that they didn't give them as much time at the end of their episodes to celebrate, but nonetheless, it was fine. The only real kind of bit in this whole episode was a chip count since three-handed play began graphic that showed kind of just the ups and downs of all three players. Albertini, of course, in the bottom half of the graph all by himself, and then Hellmuth and Baranov way up here for the most part. So that was kind of mean to Albertini, I guess, but the kind of thing that's kind of cool to watch, to see every now and then.
Yeah, I mean, Albertini was playing steady. I mean, he wasn't doing anything super terrible. It's just how do you negotiate your stack when you have these two guys going at it with each other, and Hellmuth is playing any two cards and being super aggressive. I mean, I think he played respectful and got a good third place finish. It's just, this is the Phil Hellmuth show from start to finish, both in what, the hands we see and also just in the coverage in general.
Yeah, it's funny, the Hellmuth versus Baranov dynamic at the table. They're friendly, they're joking around. Even when Hellmuth gets angry, he's able to talk to him calmly. It's just a very unique story, and it was pretty perfect that they actually ended up being the final two, which doesn't always happen when you have these big rivalries take place. I mean, they began the first and second in chip count, so that was pretty cool. And again, I kind of like the idea of just giving us 4 episodes for one final table. I mean, if you're going to move up the needle onto where the episode, where the action begins in the main event, at least they chose to pick this one to give us only the final table because it's such an enjoyable, spectacular show.
Yeah, I mean, again, as I mentioned before, I like long narratives. I like really seeing these characters and their experience without the tournament. It's sort of luck of the draw that they have Hellmuth, who's, everybody knows, and everybody knows what his shtick is like. And also Chung and Mercier, and that there's so much Baranov action that you get a sense of his personality. And Albertini, a little bit of who he is, kind of in the background. But, I mean, this is such a unique tournament of the ones that we've talked about previously, because it's just the final table and it's this sort of quasi-live feel to it, that I ultimately think that it's very enjoyable for what it is.
Yeah, this specific nature of showing whole cards at the end of the hand was something that was used in the 2011 main event America, in 2012 and 2013 and 2014. But of all these tournaments, this one by far was, for me, less about guessing what the players had, but just being like surprised, like, what, they had that the whole time, and that makes it a bit more of a unique standout compared to the main events in America, where for the most part, we're seeing premium cards for the most part being played in there, just like garbage versus garbage. It's glorious.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
So that covers our trio of main event Europes. From 2013 onward, we kind of had the brief introduction of the Asia Pacific main event that would kind of shake up the scheduling for these non-American main events. We can probably talk about those at a later time, but if we're going to compare all of the main event Europes together, of the 3 we discussed today, I think 2012 is my favorite. I put 2010 in second, and then 2011 third.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I do it. I mean, again, it's hard to compare 2012 to these other tournaments because it's just the final table and it has such a different flavor and editing style to it, but it works. I mean, just in terms of sheer entertainment value, it works. Phil Hellmuth blow up is just hilarious, but it's also good to see Phil genuinely play good poker and win at the end. I mean, we haven't really seen that up till now. This is the first time we've really seen Phil walk away with something. And it's good.
That's true. It's true. If we were going to compare him to the other main event Europes before it, I might even put 2012 as maybe first or second overall. Maybe it's between 2008 and 2012 for my top spots.
Mm-hmm.
And then I put 2009 ahead of 2010 and 2011.
Yeah, that seems like a good rank for me. I mean, if we're talking pure entertainment value, 2012 is number 1. If we're talking sort of more editing and learning about poker and all that, I mean, I might have to think about that. It would be a sort of tough call for me to make. I also did see the Annette Oberstad winning that actual World Series, even though that's not on Poker Go previously. And I thought that one was okay, though toward the bottom of the pack because I didn't feel the final table was super well developed. But it has been a couple of years since I've seen it. I mean, yeah, it's a tough call. Like, what do you weigh? Do you weigh entertainment more than great poker play? Do you weigh narrativization and character development? Because then I would say the WSOP Europe's ranked toward the bottom because I don't feel that they were super well developed characters in comparison to the Las Vegas World Series. I don't know. It's a tough call to make, but in terms of entertainment value, 2012 it's definitely up top.
I'm with you there. And so I think we can only conclude a great episode like this with a spectacular unboxing of your Mind Sport Olympiad medals that came in the mail very recently. You worked very hard to accumulate an overall third place, really tied for second, but some nonsensical tiebreaker. And so let us see what you have had flown in from Europe, which is fitting given our European main event coverage today. So go for it.
Yeah, I'm not showing the other side of the package because my address is on it, but
I know.
address is on it. But yeah, I got this in the mail a week ago, so I paid only shipping and handling for it. So I did not pay money for these medals. I won them fair and square. But here we go. We're gonna
go cut that thing open, and while you're doing that, to fill in the dead time, I gotta say I expect big things from you for next year for the MSO. Poker. Oh my God! Like another bag inside.
Oh wow! Holy moly! It's like in this like weird book bag. You ever seen this? And then we got tape on the back here, so. Like a whole bag. This is cool. It's got like inscriptions. Hold on, do you see this? It's not like a
Watkins books. What the heck?
Watkins Books, Charing Cross Road, London. I've never been there, but
okay.
And here we are. We got 5 medals here, all wrapped up in plastic. All right, I don't know which one's which, but I'll just.
That's part of the fun.
So here is the first one. This is for the Omaha Poker Heads Up event. So I got bronze in all 5 of them. So here's the medal itself.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that. And then we have the event printed on the back here. So,
okay.
And then we have this. So we got like the necklace. I don't know what you call this part of the medal, but yeah, we've got like little logos for each of the games, Grand Prix. They really did a good job with this. Yeah, look at that. So that's one. I got 5 of these, so it'll be a while.
Is the picture on the front of the medal is the same for all of them?
Yeah, it looks like it is. So this is the Raz poker event that I won.
All right.
That's Raz, and then that's the Omaha Heads Up.
Okay.
Like it's the same to me.
But you gotta find the one that's for the overall one.
Yeah, I know.
It says for the sticker on the back.
Let's see, this is the overall one.
Look at that.
Yeah, look at that. It's the same one, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Number 4.
Like a kid on Christmas opening up the gifts here. This is Hold'em Heads Up.
Look at
that. And then this would be Omaha High Low.
Look at that. So I think you got to put all 5 on at once.
Of course, yes.
It'd be like 5 pounds on your neck, like in the I think or Sink on the Mole.
Yeah.
Da 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 da.
And keep in mind that I have a 6th medal that I won in 2020 in the Creative Thinking event, which was also a bronze medal. So this is, I won't wear that one on top of these, but yeah, look at that.
Look at that. Our champion, our 5-time champion, bronze champion of the poker world.
Yeah.
Look at that.
It smells like bronze. Oh my God. Yeah, these are really nice medals. They did a really good job running this event and also getting these out. I mean, I get that this, was back in June when they did these events, and it's September now getting these medals, but these are really nice. And they're very loud when they clang together. So I'm going to take them off now, but wow. Thank you to the Mind Sport Olympiad for doing this, running all this. I will, of course, try to play again next year. They also do a live event in London about August or so, and they've actually got sponsors for it. So they're starting to build a name for themselves. So really do support these guys. They also run a couple other events throughout the years. I'm not too familiar with those. So yeah, I mean, good job to them.
That's fantastic for your trophy case, for your display of your achievements as a Mind Sport Olympiad player. It's fantastic. And on that note, I think that we can conclude our episode here. Thank you for listening. We hope to see you next time for, I guess we'll probably cover some more main event Europe or Asia Pacific action. We'll figure that out. And if you guys have any suggestions for who you want us to interview next, or talk about next, let us know. We're happy to take suggestions. And if you want to guest on our show for an episode or two, let us know. We're happy to have you.
Yeah, I mean, we're interested in hearing any suggestions. I mean, Ben and I have some ideas, maybe doing rounders, maybe doing some other Netflix, poker shows. We talked about this in the past, or maybe even branching out to other reality shows like, I don't know, The Mole. Maybe whatever you guys would like to hear from us. And as I mentioned before, anybody who has done anything in poker that's been on the screen, we'd love to hear from you. Ben and I will, research, come up with some questions that are interesting, and it's totally informal. Again, we can't pay you any money. We're just two poker guys that love this game and want to talk about it. So if you're interested in coming on the show, if you're in the Mind Sport Olympiad, I'd love to hear from you personally, and we can talk shop about our experiences. Let us know, whatever you'd like.
In that case, guys, we'll see you next time. Enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, enjoy your poker on TV.
Take care, everyone.